time to smash that sub button and hit that like button to lock it in. We really appreciate each and every one of you guys. One last thing. Leave a comment on where you're listening from. I would really love to interact with my fellow supporters. Comment down a hello too, and we will respond.
Okay, so let me tell you about this insane first date I went a while back. It was honestly the weirdest experience I've ever had. I still can't get over how messed up it was. If I had known what was going to happen, I never would have gone. So, I had been talking to this guy Leon for a few days. We went online and seemed to really hit it off. We talked about everything from music to movies, and he was funny and charming. I was looking forward to meeting him. We'd set up a date for dinner at this nice Italian place downtown. The kind of place that's cozy, dimly lit, and perfect for a first date. Nothing too fancy, but definitely somewhere you could have a good conversation and enjoy a meal. The day of the date, I was getting excited. I spent a little extra time getting ready. I put on this cute dress I had been saving for a special occasion and did my makeup just right. I was trying to look casual, but also put together. I had a good feeling about Liam. Honestly, I was a little nervous, but nothing too crazy. I had gone on enough dates to know that first date jitters are normal. But then, like an hour before the date, Liam messaged me. I thought it was going to be a last-minute check-in, like, hey, are we still on? Or something, but no. He told me that something had come up with his work, and he needed to cancel. I was kind of bummed. I really wanted to meet him, but I get that life happens. So I told him it was no big deal. I mean, I wasn't going to freak out. I'm not one of those people who acts like the world is ending over small stuff. But then he said something that threw me off even more. He told me, hey, if you still might go out tonight, I can tell the restaurant that you're coming and maybe you'll meet someone else. Now I didn't know what to think. I mean, I didn't want to be all alone on a Friday night, especially not after I had spent time getting ready and getting my hopes up. But I also didn't want to show up and meet some random guy. It felt super weird to me, but I thought, why not? At least I can enjoy the food and the ambience. So I told her to go ahead and make the call, and I decided I'd just roll with it. When I showed up at the restaurant, things didn't seem too weird at first. It was just the usual hustle and bustle, the soft hum of conversation and clinking glasses. I walked in, and the host greeted me, taking me to a table for two. The whole thing felt a little surreal, but I tried to keep it together. The host pointed to the chair across from me, and when I turned around, I saw the guy who was already sitting there waiting for me. He wasn't Liam. In fact, he didn't even look like someone who would hang out with Liam. This guy was tall, but not in the way that's impressive. More like in a I don't really know how to dress for my height kind of way. He was wearing a polo shirt that was way too tight on him and had this weird air about him like he thought he was more important than he actually was. I immediately got a vibe that something was off, but I couldn't back out now. The awkwardness of the whole situation was already at peak levels. I sat down across from him, and for a few seconds I just stared at him, unsure of what to say. He was looking at me like he was trying to figure out who I was too, but there wasn't that same chemistry I had with Liam. It was like we were both stuck in this weird game of pretend. I kept thinking about Liam and how he had promised that I could meet someone else, but what I didn't expect was that it would be this guy. I don't even know what I thought was going to happen. Maybe I expected Liam to have set me up with a friend or something, but I definitely wasn't ready for this random stranger. He started talking about his job, something to do with real estate, and how he was so busy all the time. He didn't really ask much about me. It was like I was just the person he had to talk to in order to get through the night. I tried my best to be polite. I didn't want to come off as rude, but as he kept talking, I felt like I was being sucked into some kind of weird social experiment. He kept mentioning things about money, like how he could afford to treat a lady to a good time, but the way he said it made me uncomfortable. It wasn't charming, it was just weird. And honestly, I was regretting agreeing to this whole thing. As the night went on, I found myself growing more and more disconnected. He didn't seem interested in anything I had to say. Instead, it was just him bragging about his supposed lifestyle, talking about how he could buy anything he wanted but didn't really have anyone to share it with. It wasn't the kind of conversation I wanted to have. I wanted to laugh, talk about life, get to know someone, not hear about how he could afford the best of the best, but still felt empty inside. After a while, I started checking the time more and more. My phone buzzed, and when I checked it, it was Liam again. He apologized for the cancellation and said he hoped I was having a good time with the guy he set me up with. He even added that if I didn't like him, I could always leave. The message just made everything feel so much worse. It was like he was making fun of me, like he set me up on this random date just for the laughs. And I was stuck there with a guy who had zero personality. At that point, I wanted to leave, but I didn't want to be rude. I had already committed to this weird setup. So I did the whole, I'm going to be polite and stay till the end thing. I tried to finish my drink, make conversation, but nothing was working. It felt like I was a guest at a bad dinner party, and a host had forgotten I was even there. Finally, after what felt like hours, the check came. The guy paid without much fuss. I guess he felt proud of himself for doing so, but I didn't really care at that point. I just wanted out. I thanked him for the date and bolted as soon as I could. I never heard from Liam again after that night. I think he knew what had happened, but I wasn't about to reach out to him either. Honestly, it just left a bad taste in my mouth. I went home feeling like the whole thing had been one big, awkward joke that no one really laughed at. Looking back, it was such a bizarre, almost surreal situation. And I don't think I'll ever let someone talk me into a setup like that again. Never. This one date I went on was definitely not what I was expecting. I met Roxanne through a friend, and from the moment I first saw her, I was excited. She was beautiful, and we hit it off over text pretty quickly. We made plans to meet up at a nice restaurant downtown. Nothing too fancy, just a place where you could have a decent meal and talk without feeling rushed or overcrowded. Leading up to the date, everything seemed fine, but about an hour before we were supposed to meet up, I got a text from her saying she wasn't feeling too great. She mentioned she felt sick, but she still wanted to go out. I didn't know what to think. Was it a red flag? Or was it just one of those things where she didn't want to cancel? I wasn't sure, but I figured maybe she was just being polite or wanted to make a good impression. So I told her not to worry about it and that we could reschedule if she needed. But she insisted she still wanted to go. I have to admit, I wasn't thrilled. I mean, I get it. Nobody wants to go on a date when they're sick, but at the same time, I couldn't help but think it wasn't the best idea. Still, I said okay, and we decided to go ahead with it. So I picked her up, and we made our way to the restaurant. The whole ride there was a little awkward. She seemed kind of quiet, and every now and then she'd take a deep breath like she was trying to steady herself. I kept asking if she was sure she was okay, but she kept assuring me she was fine. We got to the restaurant, and things felt off. Roxanne wasn't acting like her usual self. She looked pale and wasn't engaging in conversation much. I kept trying to keep things light, but it was clear something wasn't right. Still, I didn't want to make a big deal about it. I figured maybe she just needed a little time to warm up, or maybe she was feeling more off than she let on. We sat down at the table, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. About 20 minutes into our meal, she suddenly started looking really uncomfortable. I could see her face going a little green, and before I even had a chance to ask if she was okay, she leaned over and without warning, threw up right onto my shoes. I'm not talking about a little spill or a bit of nausea. She literally curled all over my brand new $300 shoes. I froze. For a second, I just stared at the mess in disbelief. My shoes were ruined, and the whole table went silent. The people around us started to notice, and I could feel my face turning red. It was one of those moments that's so awkward you almost wish the earth would swallow you whole. Roxanne, of course, immediately started apologizing, but it was hard to focus on her words when all I could think about was how disgusting my shoes were. I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to make a scene, but honestly, I was struggling. I mean, here I was on a date with a girl who was so sick she couldn't even make it through dinner without throwing up all over me. It felt like everything that could go wrong was going wrong. I tried to act like I wasn't completely freaking out, but inside I was a mess. Part of me wanted to just leave to get out of there as quickly as possible and pretend it never happened. But another part of me, the part that was trying to be nice and understanding, told me I should help her clean up and make sure she was okay. She was still apologizing, her face flushed with embarrassment. She kept saying she didn't mean for it to happen, and I could tell she was genuinely mortified. I told her it was fine. Accidents happen, but deep down I just couldn't get past the fact that my expensive, brand new shoes, were destroyed. I wasn't sure if I should laugh it off or just leave the date right then and there. It wasn't like I could just go back to enjoying dinner with vomit all over the place, but I also didn't want to seem like a jerk for leaving when she was clearly in distress. The waiter came over to help, and after a few minutes of awkward cleanup, I tried to salvage the rest of the evening. I told Roxanne we could leave if she wanted, but she insisted on staying. I wasn't sure if that was a good idea, but she seemed determined, so I agreed. We sat there, both of us feeling uncomfortable in the aftermath. After a while, Roxanne started feeling a little better. I could see she was still embarrassed, but she seemed more relaxed. We tried to continue the conversation, but it just wasn't the same after that. The mood was completely off, and every time I looked down at my ruined shoes, I couldn't help but feel frustrated. I tried not to let it show, but I was definitely less enthusiastic about the date after that. Eventually, we finished our meal and I walked her to the car. It wasn't the date I had envisioned. I was kind of hoping to get to know her better, have a good time, but instead, it felt like an awkward mess. When I dropped her off, I tried to be nice and told her I hoped she felt better. I honestly didn't know if I wanted to see her again after that. I mean, the whole situation was so uncomfortable and gross, and it wasn't like she could help getting sick, but the whole thing just left a bad taste in my mouth. I went home that night, took my shoes off, and spent a solid hour trying to clean them, but no matter what I did, they were ruined. That's when I realized that this was probably going to be one of those stories I would tell people to get a laugh, but in the moment, it was just plain awful. Looking back, I don't know if I was more upset about the shoes or the fact that the date had completely derailed, but I guess that's how it goes sometimes. Not every date is going to go the way you expect. Some of them just leave you with memories of ruined shoes and a lot of awkwardness. That's how I ended up with a ruined pair of $300 shoes and a date that definitely went downhill. The first date with Devin started out like any other. We met on an app, exchanged some messages, and decided to meet up at a nice restaurant. It wasn't anything fancy, but definitely a step up from the casual coffee date. The kind of place with dim lights, wooden tables, and a cozy atmosphere. I figured it would be a solid choice to get to know each other better. When he walked in, I could immediately tell that he was trying to make an impression. Devin was dressed in this perfectly tailored suit, a dark navy blue number with a crisp white shirt underneath. He looked like he'd just stepped out of a business meeting, and he was carrying himself with this quiet confidence that I found kind of attractive. I'm not going to lie, I had high expectations from the start. We sat down, and the conversation flowed easily at first. He was charming, telling me about how he was the CEO of his own company and how he had built it from the ground up. He mentioned how he made good money and how his lifestyle reflected his success. I was listening intrigued, but also trying not to let the whole CEO thing throw me off. A lot of people like to exaggerate about their jobs, especially when they're trying to impress someone on a first date. I figured I'd give him the benefit of the doubt. As the night went on, the conversation moved from work to more personal stuff. We talked about family, hobbies, travel, your typical first date stuff. There was a weird tension though, like he was still trying too hard to convince me that he was this big deal. Every time he'd mention his company or his salary, there'd be this slight pause, almost like he was waiting for me to be impressed. I wasn't trying to be rude, but it did start to feel a little forced. I just wasn't sure if I was more interested in his success or the person sitting across from me. But despite my reservations, I tried to stay positive. Maybe he was just excited about his achievements. Who wouldn't be, right? I kept reminding myself that I wasn't here for his job title, but for him. So I smiled, laughed at his jokes, and kept the conversation light. Everything seemed fine. That is, until the check came. It was about an hour into the meal when the waiter placed the bill on the table. I figured he'd grab it and pay, no questions asked. After all, he'd been talking nonstop about how successful he was, how much money he made, and how he could afford all these luxury experiences. I was expecting him to pick it up without even thinking twice, but then something happened that completely threw me off. Instead of just grabbing the bill, he looked at me and said, "Hey, how about we split this?" I froze for a second, not sure if I heard him right. Did he just say that? I looked at him, and he had this casual, almost nonchalant look on his face. He wasn't joking or trying to be funny. He was serious. I don't know what it was about that moment, but everything clicked for me. All the talk about being a CEO, all the casual mentions of his wealth, it suddenly felt like a performance. Like he had been rehearsing this date, trying to play the role of the perfect successful man. But now here he was, asking me to split the bill. It didn't make sense. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what was happening. I've never been one to expect a guy to pay on the first date, but the way he presented himself, it didn't add up. It felt like a weird power move, like he was testing me to see what I'd do. Maybe it was his way of saying, "I'm rich, but I'm also down to earth." Or maybe he was just cheap, I didn't know. But I couldn't help feeling weird about it. I mean, he had been talking about his business like he was rolling in cash, And now suddenly, he wanted to go Dutch. It didn't sit right with me, but I didn't want to make a scene. I was about to make a big deal out of something that seemed so trivial, so I just shrugged it off, pulled out my wallet, and offered to split it. We paid, and then the night ended awkwardly. We walked out of the restaurant, and he gave me the whole "I had a great time" spiel, but honestly, I couldn't shake the weirdness of it all. The way he'd been talking about his success, how he had framed himself as this high-powered businessman, none of it made sense now. It felt like he had been trying to sell me a story, but when the time came to back it up, he pulled back. I thanked him for the date and told him I'd be in touch, but in the back of my mind, I knew that there wouldn't be a second one. I couldn't ignore the fact that his actions didn't match up to his words. Maybe he was rich, maybe he wasn't, but either way, I wasn't interested in playing along with whatever game he was trying to play. The whole situation left me with a bad taste in my mouth, and honestly, it wasn't even about the money. It was about the way he tried so hard to impress me with a persona that felt completely fake. If you're rich, that's great, but don't act like you're the king of the world if you can't even follow through on the basics of a first date. I never heard from Devin again, and truth be told, I was relieved. The whole date just felt wrong, like I had been duped into buying into a story that wasn't real. It wasn't the kind of date where you had fun and laughed at the awkward moments afterward. It was just disappointing. So that's how my first date with Devin ended. No sparks, no chemistry, just the realization that not everything that glitters is gold. And honestly, that's all I could think about for days afterward. The way he presented himself as this high-powered CEO, only to end up asking me to pay half, had given me a glimpse of something, but it wasn't the person I thought I was getting to know. Sometimes you just have to trust your gut, and mine told me loud and clear that Devin wasn't the guy I was looking for. I'll never forget the night I went on that first date with Ashley. It started out like any other. You know the drill. We met on one of those apps, talked for a bit, and decided to grab a drink. Nothing special, just a simple bar hangout. Or at least that's what I thought. I showed up at the bar first. It was a cozy little spot, dim lighting, rustic wooden tables, and a long bar in the center. The kind of place where you could hear conversations without shouting. And the drinks weren't outrageously expensive. I liked it there. I'd been before with friends, and I thought it would be the perfect place to get to know someone. Relaxed, chill vibes. Ashley arrived a little late, but no big deal. I was already nursing a beer when she walked in, and I immediately spotted her. She was pretty with dark hair that fell in waves around her shoulders, and she had this infectious smile. It felt like a good match from the get-go. She was friendly. We had some casual small talk about work and life, and I could tell she was excited to be there. We ordered drinks and chatted a bit more. She was easy to talk to, and we were both laughing about random stuff. At first, everything seemed normal. The kind of vibe you'd expect on a first date. Nothing too deep, just getting to know each other, feeling each other out. But soon enough, things started to shift. I wasn't keeping track of the drinks too closely, but as time passed, I noticed Ashley was ordering more and more. At first, it seemed harmless. A round of tequila shots here, another round of cocktails there. I was just chilling and enjoying my beer, but I started to get concerned when she started to slur her words after only an hour or so. I tried to make light of it, thinking she was just a little tipsy. People get drunk on first dates sometimes, right? But as the evening wore on, her behavior became off. She kept talking faster and louder, laughing at things that weren't even that funny. She'd lean into me too much, and I could feel her breath on my face, but in a way that wasn't really flirty, just awkward. By this point, I had started to notice that I was the only one drinking responsibly. It didn't bother me at first, but it was becoming clear that she wasn't even trying to slow down. I could see the bartender was giving her a bit of a side eye when she asked for another drink, but he didn't say anything, probably just assuming she was fine. It was starting to get uncomfortable. I didn't want to be a buzzkill, but at the same time, I didn't want to be the guy who let a stranger get way too drunk on their first date. I wasn't sure what to do. I wasn't really prepared for this kind of situation. I wasn't sure if I should cut her off or if I should just let her have fun. The whole thing felt strange, like I was suddenly in a situation I hadn't signed up for. Around the fourth round of shots, she started stumbling a little when she got up to go to the bathroom. Her movements were sluggish, and I could tell she was losing control of herself. I wanted to be nice and help, but I didn't know how. Should I follow her? Make sure she was okay? Or should I just let her handle it? It was a tough call, and I wasn't sure where the line was between being a gentleman and stepping over it. She came back after a while, but now things were getting worse. She wasn't just tipsy anymore. She was full-on drunk, and it was becoming embarrassing. She started getting louder, talking about random things that didn't really make sense. Her words were starting to slur even more, and she kept leaning in too close. I kept trying to steer the conversation in a safer direction, but she wasn't picking up on any of it. I wasn't sure if I should be laughing or if I should call it a night, but I definitely wasn't having fun anymore. It wasn't the kind of date where you could just enjoy the awkwardness and laugh it off. It was getting uncomfortable. At some point, she tried to grab my arm, but instead of gently touching it, she practically fell into me. I caught her, but then she just laughed and started talking about how great it was to be on a date with me, how she never had a first date go so well. Her words didn't match her actions. She was too far gone to even understand how she was acting. I knew this couldn't go on much longer. I didn't want to be rude, but I had to make a decision. I didn't feel safe being out with her anymore. At that point, I could tell she wasn't even really aware of what was going on around her. I didn't want to make a scene, but I didn't want her to get into a bad situation either. I tried to keep it together, asking her if she wanted me to call her a cab. She didn't answer me right away. She was leaning on the table, staring into space like she didn't know where she was. The whole thing felt so off. I wasn't sure what to do or how to leave without feeling like I was abandoning her. I didn't want to be the guy who left a drunk girl alone in a bar, but at the same time, I had no idea how to handle it. It felt like the whole night was spiraling and I had no control over it. Eventually, I ended up calling her a cab. I didn't want to, but it felt like the best thing to do. She didn't seem mad about it. In fact, she seemed almost relieved. She got into the cab, waved goodbye, and I watched as it drove off into the night. I didn't feel good about the whole situation. I was left standing there, staring at the bar, trying to figure out what went wrong. Was she always like that? Was it something I said? Or was it just the alcohol? I still don't know, and honestly, I'm not sure if I ever will. I went home that night feeling more confused than anything. That wasn't a date, it was a disaster. I couldn't stop thinking about it for days, wondering if I should have done more, if I should have said something differently. In the end, I just couldn't shake the thought of how out of control the whole thing had become, and how it had left me feeling completely out of my depth. I'll be honest. I never expected my first date with Declan to go the way it did. I mean, we were supposed to just meet at the park, grab some coffee, and chat. Nice and easy, right? That's how dates usually go. But no, this one took a seriously strange turn, and now I can't shake off what happened. It all started pretty normally. Declan seemed cool at first. We met through an app, had a couple of good conversations, and I figured he seemed like a nice guy. Nothing extraordinary, but he was funny, laid back, and had a decent vibe. We agreed to meet at the park, thinking it'd be chill. It was one of those afternoons where the sun was out, but it wasn't too hot. Perfect for sitting on the grass and having a conversation, or so I thought. When I got to the park, I spotted him right away. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, nothing too fancy, just a guy trying to be comfortable. He waved at me, smiling, and I waved back, trying not to be nervous. I mean, first dates can always be a little awkward, but we were both in our 20s, so it should have been easy enough, right? We started walking around the park, talking about random stuff. The usual first date topics, where we grew up, what we did for work, and what kind of music we liked. I was starting to feel like this was actually going pretty well. He was funny, we had some common interests, and there were no super awkward silences. Things were going well until, well, they weren't. After about 20 minutes of walking, he suddenly stopped. I wasn't sure why, but I looked up at him, wondering if maybe I'd said something weird. Before I could even ask if everything was okay, he just turned to me and said, "I need to go to the toilet." I mean, sure, I wasn't going to judge him for needing a bathroom break. Everyone has to go at some point. But then, without any kind of warning, he started pulling down his trousers right there in the middle of the park. I stared at him, frozen. At first, I thought he was just messing around, like maybe he was playing some joke or pulling my leg. But then the unthinkable happened. Declan wasn't just pulling down his trousers to go to the toilet in the traditional sense. No, he just stood there, right on the grass, and this is going to sound insane. He started peeing, and I kid you not, he started pooping too. Right there in the middle of the park, on the grass, in broad daylight. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was just standing there, completely horrified, trying to process what was happening. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but nope. This guy was seriously relieving himself in the open like it was no big deal. And as if that wasn't bad enough, people were walking by. Families with kids, joggers, dog walkers, all just minding their business, while Declan, the guy I just agreed to go on a date with, was literally squatting down and doing his business in the park. I felt my heart race. I'm pretty sure I went completely pale. My first instinct was to turn around and run, but I was frozen in place, watching in disbelief. I didn't know what to do. Should I yell at him? Should I just walk away? Should I try to explain that this was not okay? But no words came out of my mouth. I just stood there in complete shock, as he seemed totally unaware of how bizarre this whole situation was. I mean, who does that? Who just goes to the park on a date and decides, yeah, I'm just going to go here? After what felt like an eternity, he finished, stood up, and calmly pulled his trousers back up. No apology, no explanation. He just casually looked at me and said, "Ah, that feels better." I still couldn't speak. My mind was racing. I had no idea what to say. I wanted to scream, but I just stood there, feeling a mix of disgust, confusion, and total embarrassment. Without thinking, I took a step back. I had no idea what I was supposed to do. This wasn't just a little awkward. It was downright disturbing. I was starting to feel like I had been caught in some kind of weird social experiment or some kind of bizarre joke that I wasn't in on. But it wasn't a joke. He just seemed normal about it. He didn't even seem to care that what he had just done was utterly unacceptable. I didn't even want to be near him at that point, but I still didn't know how to leave without making things worse. I managed to gather my composure, but it was obvious that I wasn't okay. I tried to be polite, even though I was dying inside. I said something along the lines of needing to go home, trying to keep it together. He didn't seem to pick up on how weird everything had gotten, and he even suggested we go grab a coffee afterward like nothing had happened. That was it for me. I told him I wasn't feeling well and that I had to leave. I practically sprinted out of the park, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't even look back. As I walked home, I couldn't believe what had just happened. I mean, seriously, what kind of person does that on a date? It wasn't even an accident. It was a conscious decision to just drop everything and go in the park like it was a bathroom. I kept replaying the whole situation in my head, trying to figure out if I had missed some kind of sign that this was going to happen. But no, there was nothing in the world that could have prepared me for that. Needless to say, I never saw Declan again. I blocked him on every platform, and honestly, I tried to forget that whole thing ever happened. But every time I passed that art alley, I get this weird feeling. It's like my brain can't unsee what I saw, and I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to look at a park the same way again. I thought I had a pretty good sense of people. I mean, I'm not some detective, but I can usually tell if something's off after a couple of minutes with someone. That's why this whole thing with Tina still messes with my head. It was supposed to be just a casual first date, nothing fancy, just dinner and some conversation. But what happened completely flipped the whole thing on its head, and to this day, I can't figure out if I was being lied to from the start or if I was just a pawn in someone's weird game. We met on one of those dating apps. I'm not gonna lie, I wasn't expecting anything serious. You know how it is. Casual chats, a little back and forth, some laughs, and you see if you click. Tina seemed cool at first. Her profile was full of pictures from hikes, cute selfies, and some random quotes from books and movies I liked. She wasn't drop dead gorgeous or anything, but she was definitely cute. She had this natural charm, and we seemed to vibe, so we decided to meet up at a local Italian place. It was simple, easygoing, nothing special, just a nice night out. When I saw her at the restaurant, though, something caught me off guard. She looked totally different from her pictures. Not in a bad way, but just off. Maybe it was the lighting or the fact that she had a little more makeup than I'd expected, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was a little out of place. We sat down, ordered our food, and for a while, everything was going fine. We chatted about our work, our hobbies, the usual boring first date topics. I was starting to feel more comfortable, but there was still this nagging thing I couldn't put my finger on. Then it happened. I looked down at the table and I saw it, an engagement ring. The kind that makes your stomach drop when you spot it on someone's finger. I couldn't help but stare for a second. It was sitting on her left hand, snug against her wedding finger, sparkling a little in the dim light of the restaurant. I didn't say anything right away because, well, it wasn't really the right moment, right? But I had to know. I mean, she hadn't mentioned anything about being engaged or even being in a serious relationship, and here she was with a damn engagement ring on. After a few more minutes of talking, I casually asked her about it. I kept my tone neutral, trying not to sound like I was accusing her of anything, but I had to know. She quickly shrugged it off, flashing a smile, and told me it was just a ring her grandmother had passed down to her. I was a little skeptical, sure, could have been, but why wear a family heirloom on your wedding finger, right? But I didn't press it. Maybe it was a personal thing, and I didn't want to sound rude, so I let go. Besides, I figured it could just be a misunderstanding. The rest of the date went by without anything too strange happening. We talked about some random stuff, chipped around a little, and honestly, it was a decent time. But I kept catching myself glancing down at that ring, trying to figure out what was going on. In the back of my mind, I kept telling myself I was overthinking it. It was just a ring, right? After dinner, she suggested we go for a walk near the river. I was still a little weirded out, but I went along with it. The night was pretty, and she seemed sweet enough. We had a nice stroll, some more small talk, and by the end of it, she asked if I wanted to come back to her place for a drink. I said yes because, well, I didn't want to seem weird or distant. Plus, I wasn't really ready to call it a night just yet. I still had questions, and maybe, just maybe, this would give me a chance to get some answers. When we got to her apartment, I immediately noticed how different it felt. It was nice, but not in the way you'd expect from someone who just had a casual night out. The place was immaculately clean, like everything had been dusted and organized perfectly. It had this polished, almost too perfect vibe to it. At that point, I was still trying to let go of my concerns. I figured I was just overthinking things, that maybe she just had some family thing going on, or maybe it was just a personal item that meant something to her. I had no clue what was coming next. We sat on her couch, and she handed me a drink. We chatted for a while longer, but my brain was still stuck on that damn ring. As I was trying to focus on what she was saying, I couldn't help but feel more and more like something was off. It was like all of my instincts were screaming at me, but I couldn't explain why. Then, out of nowhere, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She picked it up, glanced at it, and her face changed. Just a little, but enough for me to notice. She smiled in this way that felt forced, like she was trying to hide something. She quickly put the phone down and went to the kitchen for a second, leaving me alone in the living room. Curious, I glanced at the phone. The lock screen showed a picture of her and a guy. They were standing together, smiling, and she had her arms around him. It was one of those pictures that screamed couple, and I realized in that moment that I had been completely duped. She had a fiancé. The ring, the smile, the way she brushed off my question earlier. It all clicked. She wasn't just some girl looking for a date. She had a life, a serious one, and I had been some random guy she'd been playing with for the night. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that picture, but when she came back, I felt this weird, heavy tension between us. I don't know if she knew that I had seen the phone, but I couldn't shake the thought. She hadn't just been wearing a ring for sentimental reasons. She was engaged, and I had been part of some weird game she was playing. I didn't say long after that. I grabbed my things, said I had to go, and bolted out of there as fast as I could. I'm not proud of how I handled it, but honestly, I didn't know what else to do. I just wanted out. Looking back now, I'm still not sure if she was just bored, looking for some attention, or if there was something more to it. But that date, it wasn't a date. It was a trap, and I was the sucker who walked right into it. I never thought a first date could go so sideways. I had awkward dinners, bad small talk, and the occasional miscommunication, but nothing quite like this. It all started with a dating app match. I was scrolling through profiles when I came across Christina's. Her profile was a curious mix of anime references, cute selfies, and cryptic posts about finding magic in the mundane. I thought, why not? I'm into anime, and she seemed interesting enough. We chatted for a bit, shared a few laughs, and eventually agreed to meet up at a local cafe. Nothing fancy, just a casual spot to chat and see if we clicked. I arrived at the cafe first, grabbed a table by the window, and waited. It was a warm afternoon, and I was feeling a bit nervous but hopeful. After a few minutes, I spotted her walking towards the entrance. She was different. At first, I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but as she drew closer, it hit me. Christina was wearing a full-on anime cosplay. Not just a wig and some cat ears. No, she was dressed as a character from a show I didn't recognize. The outfit was elaborate, complete with intricate details and accessories. Her makeup was flawless, and her eyes sparkled with an intensity that immediately reminded me of a mango panel. For a moment, I thought maybe she had just come from a convention or something. It seemed a bit much for a casual cafe date, but I figured I'd roll with it. I stood up to greet her, trying to hide my surprise, and she smiled widely. It wasn't a regular smile, though. It was the kind you'd seen on a character from an anime, full of exuberance and energy. I smiled back, though I wasn't sure how to read the situation. "Hi, I'm Christina," she chirped, her voice high-pitched and almost childlike. It wasn't like she was trying to be playful. It felt more like she was, in character. She didn't drop the tone or switch back to something more natural. This was it. Her voice, her presence, her entire being was a performance. I sat back down and gestured for her to take a seat. "Hey, it's nice to meet you. I didn't expect the full cosplay. Are you just coming from a con or something?" "Oh no, this is just my everyday look. I love anime and I feel like I'm really in touch with my character. They're part of me," she explained enthusiastically, her eyes glowing as if she was recounting the plot of an epic series. I nodded along, not really sure how to respond. She didn't seem to want to talk about anything that wasn't anime. Every question I asked seemed to lead into an anime plotline or character arc. "So, what kind of things you enjoy doing when you're not cosplaying or watching anime?" I tried to steer the conversation into something more grounded. Her answer came without missing a beat. "I love exploring the world around me, finding magic in the mundane. Like, sometimes I feel like I'm living in the wrong world. I wish I could jump into an anime and leave this reality behind." That's when I realized Christina wasn't just obsessed with anime. She was living it. I had encountered people passionate about their hobbies before, but this was something else. Her entire sense of self seemed woven into the fabric of the anime universe. The conversation became increasingly difficult. While I could follow along with references, I wasn't deeply invested in the characters she was talking about. She didn't seem to care for anything outside of her anime world. No questions about my life, no interest in my opinions. It was like I was an audience member and she was the star of a one-woman show. The more she spoke, the more I felt like I was being pulled further into her world, a place where I didn't belong. I tried to redirect the conversation, but it was like hitting a brick wall. I asked about her work, her family, her goals, but all her responses tied back to anime. She talked about feeling out of place in the real world and how she could relate to certain characters who were lost souls. It was as if the world outside her anime universe didn't matter. At some point, she suddenly asked, "Would you like to come back to my place? We can watch some of my favorite episodes together." I was caught off guard. We had just met, and I didn't know what to make of this invitation. The date had already been unconventional, and part of me just wanted to get out of the situation. But I didn't want to be rude, so I agreed. Maybe things would make more sense when I saw her home. Maybe this was just an eccentric passion that I didn't fully understand yet. We drove to her apartment, and as we walked inside, it hit me. Her entire apartment was decorated like an anime. Posters plastered the walls, each one featuring characters I didn't recognize. The shelves were cluttered with figurines, manga volumes, and plushies. Even the furniture was themed, cushions shaped like characters, curtains with prints from shows I had never heard of. It wasn't just a hobby for her, it was a lifestyle. I felt like I had stepped into a completely different world, one where reality had been swapped out for a colorful fantasy. We sat down on the couch, and once again she launched into her monologue about her favorite anime, her favorite characters, and how she longed to live in a world where she could interact with them. I nodded, trying to keep up, but the disconnect between us had only grown wider. She was passionate, yes, but she was lost in her own reality. And as the night went on, it became clear that she wasn't interested in sharing anything real with me. She was happy in her world, and was just a visitor who didn't fit in. By the time I decided I'd had enough, I made my excuses. "I've got an early morning tomorrow," I said, standing up. "Thanks for the evening, Christina. It was interesting." She smiled brightly, completely unfazed by my abrupt departure. "I hope you find your own magic out there," she called out as I left. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just experienced something surreal. It wasn't a bad date, but it was nothing like I had imagined. Christina was kind, passionate, and clearly in love with her world. But it wasn't a world I could be a part of, and that was fine. I haven't heard from her since, and I don't think I will, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Some worlds are meant to be admired from afar, not lived in. I don't know why I thought Dustin would be different. He seemed normal at first, just another guy from the dating app. We chatted for a while before agreeing to meet up for our first date. Nothing too fancy, just dinner at this local place I've been wanting to try. It wasn't a big deal, right? Just a simple first date, a couple of drinks, maybe some light conversation, and that would be that. But something fell off the second I opened my door that night. I'd been running late, as usual, and didn't text him to let him know. I didn't think it was a big deal, but I guess it was. When I finally got to the restaurant, I spotted Dustin sitting at the bar, looking exactly as he did in his photos, dark hair, nice smile, looking kind of normal. But I could tell something wasn't quite right. It wasn't the way he looked or the way he smiled. It was the silence when I sat down, like he was waiting for me to speak but wasn't sure how to fill the space. I smiled, told him I'd just been stuck in traffic, and started to order a drink to settle into the evening. As I did, I noticed that he wasn't really responding to anything I said. He'd nod or give short answers, but I could see his eyes drift around the room like he was distracted. Not in a wow, this place is cool way, but more like he was hunting for something. It didn't sit well with me, but I tried to ignore it. Maybe I was just being paranoid. It wasn't like this was my first awkward date. Still, something was off, and I couldn't place it. What I didn't know then was that the whole evening had already started long before I sat down at that bar. The truth? He'd already been in my house for almost an hour. When I finally got home later that night, I was about to unlock the door when I stopped dead in my tracks. The feeling of someone watching me hit like a ton of bricks. I looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing. The street was empty, the night quiet. Maybe it was just the nerves from the date. But then I tried to shake it off and stepped inside. I felt that same unease as soon as I entered the house. The hallway light was on, which I knew I hadn't left on. I always turned it off before leaving, but who knows, maybe I just forgot. But no, something about it was just wrong. It wasn't like anyone had been in the house. It didn't look like anything had been touched, except for one thing, the door to my bedroom. It was slightly ajar. I know I closed it before leaving. I always do. So why was it open now? I stood there frozen for a second, my hand still on the door handle, staring at the gap. My heart started pounding. It was as if someone, had been waiting for me. I could feel it. Slowly, I pushed the door open and peered inside. Everything seemed normal. The bed, the dresser, the mirror on the wall, but something didn't sit right. I couldn't put my finger on it. Then I saw it. Sitting neatly on my dresser was my phone charger, the one I always left by my bed, the one I hadn't touched in hours. The thing was, I didn't leave it there. It was draped over a stack of books, with the cord just hanging off the edge like someone had carelessly placed it there. My phone charger. In that position, on my dresser. My chest tightened, and I forced myself to breathe. Could it have been him? Could Dustin have somehow gotten in before I left for the date? Was he waiting for me to come back? My stomach churned with a new level of fear. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe it was just an accident. But deep down I knew something was off. I knew I wasn't just imagining things. I quickly moved to the kitchen to get some water, my hands shaking as I grabbed the glass. I wasn't sure why I needed water, maybe just a distraction. But as I turned on the faucet, my thoughts raced. Dustin had been unusually quiet, almost too observant, like he was taking notes of every little thing I said or did. His eyes weren't just wandering the bar. They were scanning, analyzing. And when I got home, I realized what that meant. I wasn't his first date. I put the glass down and, against my better judgment, grabbed my phone. My fingers were trembling as I unlocked it and opened the messages. I scrolled back through our conversations, hoping to find something, anything, to make sense of what had just happened. As I was scrolling, my stomach dropped. There was a message from him, sent just before our date, something I hadn't noticed before. "You're sure you're still coming, right? I wouldn't want to show up for nothing." My hands went cold as I read the message again. Show up for nothing. That was when I felt the flood of realization hit me like a brick wall. I wasn't the only one he'd been watching. Dustin hadn't just been waiting at the restaurant. He had been waiting here, at my house. He had snuck in. There was no other explanation for the charger, no other way to explain how he'd known exactly when I was running late. The dread that had been slowly creeping up my spine the entire evening now exploded into full-blown panic. I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't imagining things. Dustin had been inside my house before our date even started. And now I was alone. And he knew where I lived. It took everything in me to remain calm, but I didn't know how much longer I could hold it together. I needed to make sure everything was locked. Double-check the windows, the doors. But I was afraid to move, afraid to make a sound, terrified that somewhere in my house, Dustin was hiding, waiting for me to make a mistake. I grabbed my phone again and evaded calling anyone, but I didn't even know what to say. I was frozen. So I did the only thing I could think of. I called a friend, someone I knew would pick up. When they didn't answer, I was left standing in my kitchen, heart pounding, not knowing what to do next. Eventually, I realized I needed to leave. I had to get out. I wasn't safe here. I grabbed my bag, shoved my phone into my pocket, and hurried to the front door. But the second I stepped outside, I paused. There in the distance, I saw him. Dustin. He was standing in front of my house, just staring at the front door, like he had been waiting for me to come out. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. He didn't see me. But I knew he'd been watching. He was always watching. The fear that had been building up inside me since the moment I noticed my charger on the dresser exploded, I ran. And I didn't stop running until I got to my friend's house. I never went back to that place. Dustin never tried to contact me again. But to this day, I still wonder how much he knew, how long he had been watching me. That night, he didn't just show up for a date. He was watching me long before that. I wasn't even that into Phil when we matched. He had one of those profiles that felt a bit try-hard, like he Googled how to stand out on dating apps and followed it word for word. Every photo looked overly curated, and hiking, him holding a dog, and next to a random piano he probably didn't know how to play. But I was bored, and his messages were okay. Decent grammar, not overly flirty, kind of awkward, but in a way that made me think he might actually be a decent guy. He asked if I wanted to meet up for creeps at this little cafe on the edge of town. I said sure, mostly because I hadn't had a good creep in months and I figured it'd be low pressure. Casual enough to bail if it was weird, but still a step above fast food. I got there first. The place was small, a little overly decorated with string lights and fake plants in jars, but cute. I grabbed a table near the window and texted him that I was there. 2 minutes later, he walked in, and I almost didn't recognize him. Phil was wearing a weirdly oversized coat, like one of those puffy ones that looks like it's eating your entire torso. Under it, he had a bright orange hoodie with some unidentifiable logo on the front. His hair looked like it hadn't been washed in a couple of days, and his eyes had that wide, kind of jittery look. But whatever. First impressions aren't everything. Maybe he had a rough morning. I smiled, said hi, and he sat down across from me. Right off the bat, he talked too fast. Not in a cute, nervous way. More like he'd had 3 cups of coffee and no food. He went on about how he didn't believe in social media, how influencers were what's wrong with culture, and how he once threw his phone in a river for mental clarity. I tried to keep up, but the conversation didn't really feel like a conversation. It was more like I was a podcast listener who accidentally ended up face to face with the host. When the waitress came, he ordered a crepe with strawberries and chocolate. I ordered a simple one with lemon and sugar. I tried to lighten the mood by saying how underrated lemon was. He didn't laugh. He said sugar is a trap laid by capitalist food chains, which, okay, not really the vibe I was going for. Anyway, here's where it gets bad. The crepes came. They looked amazing, honestly. Thin, soft, folded just right, a little powdered sugar on top. I picked up my knife and fork, about to take the first bite, and then I looked up. Phil had both hands on his crepe, not holding the plate and the food. He grabbed it like it was a slice of pizza, pulled it apart with his fingers, and started eating it. No utensils, no napkin. Chocolate oozing out the sides, strawberries falling into his lap, and he just kept going like that was completely normal. I was stunned. At first, I thought maybe he dropped his fork or something, but no. His fork and knife were sitting untouched on the table. He just chose violence. He took another bite, and the crepe flopped, and this glob of chocolate landed on the side of his mouth. He didn't wipe it. He just kept chewing, talking the whole time, like he wasn't destroying a beautiful pastry with his bare hands. The chocolate started dripping down his fingers. I watched him lick it off one finger at a time. Slowly. He looked at me while he did it, like he was proud of this, like I was supposed to be impressed by how free or authentic he was being. I tried not to gag. I looked away, focused on my food, but it was hard to enjoy it with the sounds he was making. Wet chewing, lip smacking, the occasional grunt like he was really going through something emotionally with each bite. At one point, he offered me a piece from his plate. I didn't respond. I just shook my head and stared at my lemon crepe, trying to will the moment to end. But he didn't pick up on the bite. He kept eating, licking again, licking his entire palm at one point because chocolate had dripped into it. I thought it would end when the food was gone. It didn't. He picked up the empty plate and tilted it to his face. He actually licked the plate. I wish I was exaggerating. His tongue was on ceramic. In public. At 2:30 in the afternoon on a Wednesday. The table next to us went silent. I could feel their side eyes from across the room. I finished my crepe as fast as I could, told him I had to go soon because I had work stuff to do, which was a lie. I just needed to get away. He seemed confused but didn't argue. He pulled out his wallet, made a huge deal about how it was made from recycled bicycle tires, and then told me he only carried cash because banks are a scam. I paid for my own creep. He walked me to my car, which I didn't ask for. The walk was mostly silent, except for him humming what sounded like a funeral march. He stood weirdly close to me at the door, just standing there while I fumbled with my keys, and then asked if I wanted to do this again, maybe somewhere even less structured. I mumbled something like, maybe, and drove off so fast I forgot to put my seatbelt on. I blocked him that night. The next day, he sent me a DM from a backup account saying he hoped I didn't lose my spark to the system. I didn't reply. I reported the account. I still can't look at creeps the same way. Not because of the food, but because I now associate them with sticky fingers, slow licking, and a grown man treating strawberry syrup like a survival snack. That was the first and last time I ever let Tinder pick my lunch date. I should have known something was off when she asked if we could split dessert before we even got appetizers. Her name was Linda. We matched on Tinder one of those slow weekends where the weather sucks and everything feels kind of dull. Her profile had a different vibe. No mirror selfies, no filtered club pics. Just a bunch of random shots of her in places like a coin laundry, sitting on the floor of a supermarket with frozen peas, or laying in the grass with a huge sun hat covering half her face. She seemed quirky, but not in the try-hard way. Just different. We talked for maybe 4 days. Not constantly, just enough to feel like meeting in person wouldn't be weird. She said she was free Thursday, so I picked this small Italian place downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was decent, like a we might share a bottle of wine, but also order garlic bread type of place. When I showed up, she was already sitting at the table near the window, wearing this oversized denim jacket, dark lipstick, chipped black nail polish. She looked like someone who had stories and maybe trouble, but the kind of trouble that still felt safe, like interesting trouble. I remember thinking that. She smiled when I walked in, stood up to hug me, and I noticed she didn't smell like perfume or body spray. She smelled like clean laundry and cigarettes. Not super strong, just faint. We sat, ordered drinks. I got a beer, she got water with lemon, said she didn't really drink on first dates because alcohol makes people pretend they're more charming than they are. The conversation was easy at first. She talked about how she used to live in Berlin, how she almost went to art school but didn't. I asked her what she did now, and she said, freelance stuff, which I didn't push because I didn't want to be that guy. She asked a lot of questions about me, what I did for work, what my apartment was like if I lived alone, what kind of music I listened to when I was sad. That went through me a little, but I laughed and told her the truth. She just nodded and said I seemed like someone who listened to full albums, not just playlists. At one point, she dropped her fork under the table and ducked down to grab it. She stayed under there for longer than you'd expect. I thought maybe her bag fell too or something, but she popped back up like nothing happened. She smiled, started talking again, like she hadn't just vanished under the table for 10 full seconds. I didn't think much of it in the moment. Dinner ended and I paid the bill. She offered to split, did the whole reach for the wallet routine, but I said I got it. It wasn't expensive and I didn't mind. She thanked me, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "You're sweet." I don't know why, the way she said it made me feel like a little kid who just did something predictable. After dinner, we stood outside for a bit. She didn't ask to come back to my place or anything, just said she had to meet a friend. She didn't hug me this time. Just waited and walked off in the opposite direction, hands in her pockets. I stood there watching her disappear around the corner, not really sure how the date went. 2 days later, I was in the checkout line at the grocery store when my card declined. I figured maybe it was a bank error or I forgot a payment or something. I checked my account on my phone and everything was gone. Not just gone, maxed out. My credit card balance was completely full. Charges from stores I'd never even heard of. Sneakers, electronics, a vape shop in another city, some fast food chain I've never been to. I froze. I scrolled through the list over and over. The charges started about 12 hours after the date. They were all small at first, $30 here, $70 there. Then they got bigger. $300 at a sneaker store, $460 at some boutique I couldn't even find on Google. All of it hit fast within 36 hours. That's when I remembered her ducking under the table. I went to my bank, filed a report. Canceled the card, obviously. I told them I thought my card was stolen. The guy at the desk asked if I lost my wallet, and I said no, it was in my jacket the whole time. That's when it hit me. My wallet was in my inside pocket, zipped. I didn't even notice it was open when I got home that night. I tried to look her up again. Her Tinder profile. Gone. Vanished like it never existed. The photos, the chat history, everything wiped. I only remembered her Instagram because she mentioned it once in conversation. I searched it. Also gone. The number she gave me. Disconnected. She had completely erased herself. It's been 3 months now. I got most of the charges reversed through fraud claims, but not all of them. Some of them the bank's still investigating, whatever that means. I filed a police report, but didn't have much to give them. No full name, just Linda, and a few disconnected pieces. Sometimes I wonder how many other people she's done this to. If that whole freelance thing was just bouncing between cities, running this weird con, she knew exactly what she was doing. From the slow questions, to the weird compliments, to the moment under the table, every part of it was smooth. What messes with me the most is how normal she seemed. Like she didn't have to go out of her way to trick me. She just played it cool. Just slipped under the table, took the card, and smiled like she already knew she was going to disappear. Every time I go out now, I check my wallet constantly. I don't let anyone near it. I still go on dates, but they don't feel the same. Every once in a while, someone will ask why I keep my hand in my jacket the whole time. I tell them it's just a habit. It is now. I knew the date was gonna be weird before I even got inside the Nando's. I was still about 3 steps from the front door when I saw him through the window, sitting at a corner table with the whole tuxedo on. Like actual black suit jacket, white shirt, bow tie, the full thing. I actually stopped walking for a second. Thought maybe it was a joke. Maybe he just dressed up for laughs. But nope, he looked dead serious. Elbows on the table, hands folded, just staring at the menu like he was about to order wine pairings with his peri-peri chicken. I almost turned around right then, but I felt bad. Plus, we'd been messaging for like a week and he'd seemed all right. Kind of intense, but funny. He had this dry way of texting, always super proper with grammar and stuff. Weird, but not creepy. He said he liked old movies and had a pet lizard named Milo. Honestly, that lizard thing made me trust him more for some reason. People with lizards seem like they know loneliness. So yeah, I went in. The second I sat down, I felt I had stepped into someone else's reality. The tuxedo wasn't even the strangest part anymore. It was how calm he was about it. Like this was just what he wore out. Like people don't eat garlic bread and bottomless Coke next to a guy who looks like he just came from a funeral or wedding. He stood up when I came in. Literally stood up like we were at some formal dinner. I laughed kind of awkwardly, but he didn't laugh back. Just nodded and sat again. The server came over and asked if we were ready to order, and Justin said, really quietly, that he needed a few more minutes to choose something worthy, like, bro, it's Nando's. The fanciest thing on the menu is a double chicken wrap, if you allow me. I tried to talk about normal stuff. Asked him how his week was, how Milo was doing. He said he restructured his schedule to make time for me. His exact words. Restructured. Like he was talking about a meeting. He also told me he fasted all day because he wanted to enjoy this meal fully and spiritually. I had no idea what to say to that. I just nodded and picked at my corn. It kept getting stranger. He didn't touch his food for almost 10 minutes after it arrived. He just sat there watching me eat like it was some kind of performance. His eyes didn't blink much. He had this way of staring just past me, like he was thinking about something else, but also very present. I asked him if something was wrong, and he smiled, but it didn't match his face. The corners of his mouth moved, but his eyes stayed locked in place. Then he took something out of his jacket. This little black notebook. He flipped it open and started asking me questions. Not casual stuff either. Like, how do you define loyalty? And what role do you see yourself playing in a committed partnership? I laughed at first, thinking maybe it was some kind of joke or weird flirting thing. But he didn't laugh. He just stared and waited for my answers. I made something up, but it honestly didn't feel like anything I said mattered. He just nodded like he was checking things off a list. The weirdest part was that it didn't feel random, like he wasn't just being awkward. It felt like he had a plan, like he'd rehearsed it. I started getting uncomfortable when I noticed that he hadn't really eaten anything. He ordered this big platter, and it was just sitting there getting cold while he wrote in that notebook. Then he said he had something to show me. I was already halfway mentally checked out, but I was trying to be polite. He pulled out a folded up piece of paper from his inside pocket and passed it across the table. It was a printed schedule, like actually typed out with dates and bullet points. It had titles like Month 1, Connection, Month 2, Strengthening Foundation, Month 3, Emotional Integration. Under each heading were little goals and tasks, like attend weekly dinner together or initiate shared hobbies. I stared at it for way too long. It was so detailed, so planned out. He even had blank spots to fill in depending on how progress went. I asked him what it was, and he said it was a relationship blueprint. That he made one for anyone he dated seriously. He said if I followed the steps with him, he could guarantee long-term compatibility. I was so thrown off I just said I needed to use the bathroom. I went to the back, locked myself in a stall, and sat on the toilet lid just breathing. Not crying or panicking or anything, just trying to make my brain catch up. The tux, the notebook, the questions, the literal schedule, it was all too much. It didn't feel like a date anymore. It felt like an interview I didn't apply for. I sat there until I heard him say my name outside the bathroom door. Not loudly, just kind of soft and slow, like he was checking if I was still there. I stayed in there another 5 minutes. When I finally came out, he was standing right outside, holding my jacket. Said he thought I might have gotten cold. I took it without looking at him and said I had to go. He didn't argue. He just nodded and said he hoped our paths would continue as outlined. Like, what does that even mean? I walked home. Didn't say goodbye, didn't check if he followed me. Just walked and deleted his number before I was even halfway there. The next day, he sent me a message that just said, Phase 1 complete. Nothing else. Just that. Blocked him instantly. I've had some weird dates, but that one really stuck with me. Not because anything dangerous happened, but because of how calculated it was. Like he'd written a script and I didn't know I was in it. Every second of it felt like I was playing along with something I didn't understand. And honestly, I still don't. I met Jenny on a Tuesday, which already felt weird. Who meets someone on a Tuesday and actually follows through with a plan? We matched on this dumb dating app I downloaded out of boredom. I wasn't really looking for anything serious, but her profile was kind of funny, and she had this dry sarcasm that made her seem real, not like she was trying too hard. She messaged me first. Something about how my hoodie looked like it had been stolen off a lost and found shelf. I thought that was hilarious, so we started talking. 2 days later, we made plans to grab drinks at this bar near her apartment. Not one of those fancy rooftop places, just a regular spot with sticky tables and a jukebox that only worked when it wanted to. When I got there, she was already at the bar, sipping some bright red drink with a straw. She looked different than her pictures. Still her, but kind of sharper. Like her eyes didn't match her smile. I don't know how to explain it. We talked for a while. She asked a lot of questions, but not in a nosy way. More like she was collecting pieces of me, one at a time, and putting them in a box to look through later. I didn't mind it, though. It made me feel interesting. We had 2 drinks. She didn't seem drunk, just relaxed. I was definitely feeling it more than I should have. She asked if I wanted to come back to her place. I hesitated for like 2 seconds, but said yeah. It wasn't even midnight. I figured worst case, we just hang out and talk more. Best case, who knows. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor of this building that looked like it used to be a motel. The kind with long outside hallways and doors all painted different shades of beige. Inside, it was pretty clean. Dim lights, lots of candles, some weird black and white art on the walls. The place didn't smell like anything. No food, no perfume, no pets. Just air. She gave me water, put on some music, then said she wanted to shower. I thought she meant she'd be quick, but then she kind of just paused and waited like she expected me to follow her. I was already half buzzed and floating through everything, so I didn't overthink it. We went into the bathroom, and it was cleaner than mine by miles, like spotless, white tiles, barely any stuff on the counter. She turned the water on and stepped in, and that was that. I joined her. It wasn't anything wild, just kind of quiet. The water was too hot, and the pressure was way too strong, like it could rip your skin off. But she liked it that way, I guess. She didn't talk much. Just stared at me a lot, which I didn't know how to react to. I tried to laugh it off, but she didn't laugh with me. She just kept watching. Not creepy, just blank. I turned around to rinse shampoo out of my hair, and that's when I saw it. There was a low camera on the shelf above the toilet pointing straight at us. Not hidden or anything, just sitting there like it belonged. Little red light on. I stared at it too long before saying anything, she noticed. She leaned against the wall, still under the water, and said it was for her only fans. Just like that. Didn't even blink, like it was no big deal. She said she used it sometimes when she had company, said it helped with traffic or whatever that meant. I didn't say anything right away. My mind was glitching out, trying to process if this was some weird joke or if I had misunderstood. But there it was. Camera, red light. And we were just standing there, under the water, with her acting like she told me she left the oven on. I didn't want to freak out. I was definitely not okay. I asked if it was recording, and she just said yeah, but only for a bit. She said it didn't show our faces and that it was totally normal, like she was walking me through a grocery list or something. I felt cold all of a sudden, even with the water burning down my back. I got out, grabbed a towel. She didn't stop me or ask anything. Just kept standing there under the water like none of it mattered. I dried off fast and grabbed my clothes from the bedroom. The lights were low, but I could still see this weird shelf above her bed with more cameras and lights and little plastic boxes. I didn't even look too long. Just got dressed, said something about needing to leave, and walked out. I walked the 2 miles home. Didn't even try to get a ride. Just walked in wet shoes with my hair dripping down my neck. Every time I thought about the camera, my stomach flipped. I couldn't stop thinking about how casual she was. How she didn't even ask if I was okay with it. Just assumed, like it was part of the set. The next day, she messaged me and said I looked good on camera. That was it. No emoji, no follow-up. I blocked her. I didn't tell anyone about it for a while because it sounded fake, like something you'd read in a sketchy forum post. But it happened. I still think about it sometimes. Like, what if I hadn't seen the camera? Would she have told me later? Or ever? What if she still uploaded it? I'll never know. The whole thing messed with my head more than it should have. Not because of the camera, really, but because of how normal it felt in the moment. Like it was just another thing people do now. Record everything. Share everything. No warning. No choice. Just eyes on you when you're most unaware. I haven't been on another date in months. Not because I'm scared or whatever. I just don't trust that people are telling the truth anymore. Sometimes it feels like everyone's running their own show, and you don't even know you're part of it until it's already uploaded. I should have gone home when the rain started. That kind of rain that isn't really rain. More like a mist that just clings to your skin and makes your hair feel gross. The sky looked like wet concrete, and everything smelled like the inside of a bus stop. Still, I went anyway because I told myself I needed to stop canceling things last minute. That's what my cousin said anyway. You always flake. That's why you're still single. Whatever. Trevor and I had been messaging for about 2 weeks. Nothing wild, just memes. Some stuff about horror movies and complaints about work. He seemed all right. His profile said he was into hiking, dogs, and stand-up comedy. Basic stuff, but at least he didn't post those gym mirror pics with captions like "grind never stops" or whatever. We agreed to meet at this old coffee shop that used to be a train station. Kinda cool if you're into that vintage aesthetic. I just liked that it was public and had decent lighting. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting near the back with a hot chocolate. He waved, stood up, smiled. Nothing off about him at first. Brown jacket, jeans, clean shoes. Pretty normal. His voice was softer than I expected. Not quiet, just kind of low and slow, like he was thinking about each word before saying it. I sat down, said hi, joked about the rain. He laughed, but it didn't sound real. It wasn't fake exactly, just hollow, like someone who'd practiced laughing in the mirror and still hadn't figured out how to make it sound right. We talked for maybe 20 minutes. It was mostly small talk, movies, food, weather. He asked more questions than he answered, which made it feel a little like an interview. But I told myself that was just nerves. I get awkward too, especially with new people, so I tried not to judge. Then he leaned back in his chair and adjusted his jacket. That's when I saw it. There was something under his hoodie pressed against his ribs on the left side. For a second, I thought it was just his phone in a weird spot, but it was too bulky, too flat. The bottom of it peeked out when he stretched, smooth metal black. I recognized the shape instantly. A gun, tucked into his waistband. I froze. I didn't say anything. I didn't even move. I just kept pretending to listen while my heart went nuts in my chest. I tried not to look directly at it again. I didn't want him to know I'd seen it. My brain was spinning, trying to make it make sense. Maybe he was a cop. Maybe he had a license. Maybe he just felt safer carrying one. But none of that made it feel any better. We were in a public place, a date. Who brings a gun on a first date? I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to freak him out or make a scene. I've seen enough crime documentaries to know how fast stuff can go sideways. So I stayed calm, or at least I tried to. I laughed at things that weren't funny. I asked about his job. I nodded a lot. The whole time, I kept thinking about that thing under his hoodie. After another 15 minutes, he asked if I wanted to go for a walk. He said there was a small trail behind the building, next to the old rail tracks. Said it had a nice view of the city when it wasn't cloudy. I smiled and said I had to go to the bathroom first. He said okay and stood up to stretch again. That's when I saw it a second time. Definitely a gun. No doubt about it. In the bathroom, I locked the stall and sat down fully clothed. My hands were shaking. I thought about texting someone, but who? And what would I say? Hey, I'm on a date with this guy and I think he has a gun. That just sounds dramatic, but I felt sick. Every instinct in me was screaming that something was wrong and I couldn't ignore it anymore. I left the bathroom and walked straight past him. I didn't make eye contact. I didn't even say goodbye. I just mumbled something about an emergency and kept walking until I was outside. Then I ran. Not full speed sprinting, just fast enough to look like I had somewhere to be. My car was parked 2 blocks away, and I didn't look back until I got in. He was standing at the front of the building, staring down the sidewalk. Just standing there, hands in his jacket pockets. Not moving, not waving, just watching. I locked my doors, turned the ignition, and drove. I didn't even turn on the music. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights following me. But there was nothing. Just rain and streetlights and that weird numbness in my arms that you get after your body's been in panic mode for too long. Later that night, he texted. Just said, had a nice time. No emojis, no question mark. I didn't answer. A couple days went by. Then he messaged again, you left in a hurry. Everything okay? Still didn't answer. He never texted again after that, but I blocked his number anyway. I looked him up online, but there wasn't much to find. No criminal record, no weird posts, no red flags that showed up in a search. Just pictures of him hiking, smiling, drinking coffee. The same pictures from his profile. Nothing that would have warned me. Nothing that said, this guy might bring a weapon to your date and suggest a walk in the woods. I told a few people about it, but most of them just said maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe it wasn't even a real gun. Maybe he had a permit. All those maybe don't change how it felt, though, and it felt wrong. I still think about it sometimes. The way he looked at me when I left. Like he already knew I wasn't coming back, and he didn't care. I don't go on many dates anymore. Not because I'm scared. Just because now, every time someone asks if I want to grab coffee, I remember the way his jacket lifted when he stretched. I remember metal and silence and a walk I never took. And honestly, that's enough. I've had a lot of weird first dates, but the one with Sam, that one was a whole other level of uncomfortable. It wasn't the usual awkward silence or bad jokes. No, it was something a lot stranger, and honestly, it took me a while to figure out what was happening. But by the end of the night, I was questioning my whole understanding of human decency. I met Sam on a dating app. She seemed pretty cool in her profile, cute smile, decent interests. She liked to hike, go to new restaurants, and had a pretty laid-back vibe. We talked for a few days before she agreed to meet up. We decided to go to this nice little Italian place I liked. It was cozy, not too fancy, but just enough to feel like it was a step up from casual. The vibe was perfect, and I thought, okay, this could be something. She showed up looking great, nothing over the top, but still enough to catch my attention. I'm not gonna lie, I was a little nervous, but I was also excited. I've always been one for the whole dinner date vibe. sitting down, chatting, and getting to know someone better. Sam had this easygoing energy to her. She smiled a lot, laughed at my dumb jokes, and we got into a pretty smooth conversation about music and travel. All was going well until the food came. We both ordered pasta, and I went for something with a spicy sausage in it. I remember it clearly because I love spicy food, and I was really looking forward to it. Sam ordered the same, but hers didn't come with sausage. We dug in and kept talking, but something felt off. At first, it was subtle. I'd take a bite, and she'd grab a forkful from my plate, but I thought maybe she was just joking around, being playful. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, it was a little weird, but who doesn't share food sometimes, right? I tried not to let it bug me too much, but then it kept happening. Every time I take a bite, I glance over, and there she was, helping herself to my plate. She wasn't even asking, just reaching over and taking a piece of my sausage or stealing some of the pasta. I'm not a huge stickler for sharing food, but something about it started to get under my skin. It wasn't just a casual nibble here and there. It was constant. I kept looking down at my plate, and it was getting emptier by the minute, while hers was still practically full. I tried to ignore it, but I noticed how little she was actually eating from her own dish. She would take a bite, then move right back to my plate. After a while, it felt more like she was just eating my food out of habit than actually being hungry. At first, I didn't say anything. I told myself it wasn't that big of a deal. But then it got worse. We were talking about something funny that happened at work, and I looked down at my plate again. This time, and she was basically digging into the last half of my pasta, and sitting there, watching her eat my dinner like it was hers. I felt this weird feeling bubble up inside of me. I wasn't even enjoying the date anymore. I wasn't enjoying the food. I was starting to get angry. I tried to stop it before I said something, but she just kept eating my food. I gave a little half laugh, trying to play off like I wasn't bothered, but she didn't even notice. Her attention was entirely on my plate like it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. I finally stopped her, or at least I tried to. I picked up my fork, and when I was about to take a bite, she reached in again. I pulled the plate back slightly, but she didn't stop. At that moment, I snapped. Not in an out-of-control, yelling kind of way, but in a way that made her stop dead in her tracks. I asked her, as calmly as I could, why she kept eating off my plate. She looked at me like I was being ridiculous, like it was no big deal. But it was a big deal to me. I didn't even want to eat anymore. I was angry and uncomfortable, but more than that, I was confused. Why was she acting like that? She didn't apologize or even seem embarrassed. She just shrugged and said something like, "Oh, I thought you didn't mind." But I did mind. I didn't even know why it bothered me so much. It wasn't like I was starving or that the food was going to waste, but there was something off about the whole situation. It felt like she didn't respect my space. She didn't care about my boundaries, and I hated that feeling. The date went downhill from there. I tried to steer the conversation back to something normal, but my mind was just spinning. I couldn't stop thinking about how she had completely ignored my boundaries with the food. I found myself checking the clock, hoping the date would end sooner rather than later. She kept talking about random things, but I wasn't really listening anymore. All I could focus on was the fact that my plate was basically empty and hers was still mostly untouched. The weird thing was she didn't seem to care about how awkward it had gotten. She didn't notice that I wasn't smiling anymore or that I was picking at my own food, hardly eating. She just kept talking, taking more bites off my plate as if nothing had changed. I was getting frustrated. At this point, I just wanted to leave, but I didn't want to be rude. So I sat there pretending like everything was fine, even though inside I was seething. The check finally came, and I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I paid because I'm not the kind of guy who let the woman pay, but I could feel the tension in the air. Sam didn't seem fazed at all. In fact, she was talking like the night had gone perfectly. I don't know what happened. It wasn't like we had a big fight or anything, but it felt like everything was wrong. I walked her to her car, but when she asked if I wanted to hang out again sometime, I just couldn't bring myself to say yes. I said something vague like, "We'll see," and then got out of there as quickly as I could. As I drove home, I kept thinking about the date, about how she'd taken food from my plate without asking, how she didn't even seem to notice that it was weird, how she acted like nothing was off. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect from someone you just met, and for me, it was the red flag I needed. I still don't get it. Why did she do that? Was it some kind of weird test, or was she just clueless? I don't know, but I haven't talked to her since. I don't think I ever will. It was just too much. Too uncomfortable. Too weird. I didn't know what I was getting into when I agreed to meet Peter. The night started off as a typical first date, but it turned into something that still haunts me to this day. I wish I could say that it was just a bad experience that I learned from, but it's been over a year, and I still look over my shoulder whenever I leave the house. It all started at this cute little coffee shop downtown. I met Peter through a dating app. His profile wasn't anything extraordinary, but he seemed nice. He had a normal job, a decent smile, and we talked for a few weeks before he asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I said yes, thinking it'd be a casual thing. I wasn't looking for anything serious, but I was open to meeting someone new. We'd agreed on a cozy little spot a few blocks from my apartment. It was quiet, intimate, and, to be honest, a little cliche, exactly the vibe I was hoping for. Nothing could go wrong, right? When I showed up, Peter was already there, sitting at a table near the window. He stood up to greet me, and I remember thinking how easygoing he seemed. We exchanged pleasantries, and everything felt normal. He wasn't the best conversationalist, but he wasn't a bad one either. He made me laugh a couple of times, and we talked about everything from movies to random childhood memories. Honestly, I thought the date was going well. The conversation flowed easily enough, and there wasn't any weirdness or awkward pauses. The first red flag came when we were talking about hobbies. I mentioned that I liked to go hiking and I was really into nature. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, just something I enjoyed doing to get out of the house. Peter looked at me for a moment, and then he casually mentioned that he had seen me out hiking a few times. He even described the trail I usually took and what time of day it was. I was taken aback at first. How did he know that? I brushed it off as coincidence. Maybe he had seen me out there once or twice. He lived nearby, so it wasn't out of the question that our paths could have crossed. But then, as the conversation went on, he mentioned seeing me at the grocery store a couple of weeks ago. That got me thinking. How would he know I was there? I didn't recognize him, and I was pretty sure I hadn't seen him in the store. Maybe he was just messing with me. Maybe it was just one of those weird coincidences. But something felt off. The rest of the date passed without incident, though, and by the time we finished our coffee, I thought maybe I was just overthinking it. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it. He offered to walk me home, and I didn't think much of it. We were just a few blocks away from my apartment, so it felt harmless enough. We walked in silence for a while, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I pushed the thought aside. When we reached the corner of my street, I turned to him, thanked him for the date, and told him I'd see him around. He didn't seem to get the hint that it was time to say goodbye, though. He stood there, staring at me with a strange, unblinking look on his face. "You sure you're okay getting home alone?" he asked. I nodded, a little confused but trying to remain polite. "Yeah, I'm good, thanks." But then something happened that I couldn't ignore. I saw him glance over his shoulder as if he was looking for something or someone. It was brief, but I noticed it. It made my stomach turn. He was still standing there, staring at me, not making a move to leave. "All right, well, have a good night," he finally said, still lingering by the corner. I turned around and walked up the street, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I locked my front door, stepped inside, and immediately closed the door behind me. As I locked it, I glanced through the peephole, just in time to see Peter standing across the street. He was just standing there, looking up at my window. He didn't move. He didn't even look around. He just stood there, staring at my apartment. My heart skipped a beat, and I backed away from the door, feeling a wave of panic wash over me. What was he doing? Why was he standing there? I waited for a while, trying to calm myself down, telling myself I was overreacting. But he didn't leave. He was still standing there. I could see his figure from the corner of my window, not moving an inch. After what felt like forever, he finally started to walk down the street, but I didn't feel relieved. I felt worse. The idea that he had been watching me, even after I said goodbye, made my skin crawl. The next day, I didn't hear from him at all. I thought maybe I had just been paranoid. Maybe I had misread the situation. But then, a few days later, I saw him again. This time, I was walking home from work, and as I turned the corner onto my street, I saw him standing at the same spot where I had said goodbye to him. He was just standing there, looking at my apartment again. This time, I didn't hesitate. I turned around and walked in the opposite direction, taking a different route to get home. I was so shaken up that I ended up taking a long way around, hoping he wouldn't follow me. But deep down, I knew he was still out there. That night, I called my friend and told her what had happened. She convinced me to call the police, but I didn't want to overreact. I kept telling myself it was all just a coincidence, that maybe he was just waiting for someone else. but the next day I saw him again. And this time he was closer, standing across the street from my building, his eyes fixed on my window. I finally called the cops. They said they'd sent someone to keep an eye on the area, but honestly, I don't know if they ever did. I never saw Peter again after that, but the whole thing left me feeling uneasy. I couldn't stop thinking about how he had watched me, how he had known things about me that he shouldn't have. It's been months now, and I still think about that night sometimes. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again, and I definitely don't think I'll ever look at first date the same way. You never know what kind of person you're really meeting until it's too late. I never thought a first date could go so wrong, but then again, I never expected Tommy. I had met him through a mutual friend, and honestly, he seemed like a decent guy. He had a good job, was good looking enough, and from the way he talked, I thought we had a lot in common. I was excited for the date, thinking it would be a normal, fun night out. Little did I know it was going to turn into a complete nightmare. It started off pretty typical. We met at this little Italian restaurant downtown, a place I'd been wanting to try for a while. Tommy seemed pretty charming at first, greeting me with a smile and pulling out my chair like some perfect gentleman. At first, I thought this was going to be one of those casual dates where we got to know each other, talked about work, hobbies, maybe made a few jokes. But it didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. We sat down, ordered drinks, and started chatting. I was talking about my job, the usual stuff, and he was nodding along. But then it happened. He started talking about his ex-girlfriend, and the tone of the conversation changed pretty quickly. It wasn't just casual, and it wasn't a we broke up on good terms kind of talk. No, Tommy went on and on about how difficult she was, how she was crazy, how she couldn't handle a man like him. He said that she was too emotional, and that's when I started feeling uneasy. It wasn't just a little complaining about an ex. It was a whole lot of bitterness and resentment, and it was aimed squarely at her for things that sounded, well, personal. I kept trying to steer the conversation in another direction, but he kept circling back to his ex. It was like he couldn't let go of the fact that she had been too needy, or that she had dared to ask him to do things that he found ridiculous. The more he talked, the more I started picking up on something off about him. It wasn't just the typical my ex was crazy stuff. There was a real venom in his words. And then it started happening. He'd casually drop little comments that felt like jabs at me, even though I hadn't said anything to deserve it. At first, I thought I was being overly sensitive, but it didn't take long for it to feel like I was being attacked for just existing. For example, he was talking about how women today don't know what they want, and how it's hard to keep up with what's acceptable now. I wasn't sure what he meant by that, but it sounded like a backhanded comment about women in general. I laughed awkwardly, not really knowing what to say, but then he kept going. He talked about how he didn't like the whole feminist thing, and how it's a shame that men can't be men anymore without getting shamed for it. I felt like I was in some weird alternate universe, and I had no idea how to get out of it. As he kept talking, it was like the layers of this guy were peeling back, and every word made him sound more and more like the kind of guy you hear about in stories, but never actually meet in person. He ranted about how women were too emotional to make decisions, and how he didn't trust any woman who had too many opinions. That's when I realized he wasn't just complaining about his ex, he was using this date as an opportunity to air out all of his misogynistic beliefs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just the words, though, it was the way he said them. His tone was so matter of fact, like he genuinely believed this stuff. It wasn't even a conversation, it was a lecture. Every time I tried to interject, to tell him that his views weren't exactly my own, he brushed me off like I didn't know what I was talking about. I was getting increasingly uncomfortable, and I was pretty sure he wasn't picking up on any of the signals I was sending. The worst part, when I politely said I didn't agree with some of his opinions, he acted like I was some sort of problem. He looked at me with his condescending smile, almost like I was an ignorant little girl who didn't understand the world. He even said, "You probably think I'm some kind of bad guy for saying these things, don't you?" Like he was trying to get me to admit that I thought he was some kind of monster. At that point, I was done. I had no interest in hearing any more of his outdated, disrespectful views. I was trapped. I didn't want to cause a scene, and I was hoping the night would somehow turn around. So I tried to push through, laughing at his jokes and trying to keep the conversation light. But the more I sat there, the more I realized how wrong it all felt. I didn't feel safe or respected, and I certainly didn't feel comfortable. I wanted to leave, but I wasn't sure how. He had ordered dessert, and I figured I'd just wait for it to arrive, finish my drink, and politely excuse myself. But as soon as the waiter brought the bill, Tommy made some remark about how I should stop being so defensive and learn to take a joke. That was the last straw. I could feel the tension rising in my chest. I could feel my face turning red with frustration. I ended up just paying my half of the bill, standing up and walking out. I didn't say anything. I didn't even look at him. I didn't need to explain myself to a guy who thought so little of women. As I walked out of the restaurant, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Looking back, I realized I should have trusted my gut the second I started hearing the way he talked about his ex. But hindsight is always 20/20, right? That night felt like the longest date of my life, and the worst part. I actually felt bad for him. Because here he was, a grown man stuck in his own bitter, toxic beliefs, unable to see past his own narrow view of the world. And I was thankful that I didn't have to deal with him anymore. I never saw Tommy again after that night, and trust me, I never will. Because when you realize someone is that deeply misguided, it's not just a red flag. It's an entire warning sign flashing at you to get out and run the other way. It was a date that started with hope and ended with relief. And every time I think back on it, I can't believe how quickly things went south. The only good thing that came from that night was the lesson I learned. You don't have to tolerate disrespect, no matter how charming someone seems at first. It's funny how quickly a day can go from this is going well to I need to get out of here. I'd like to say I saw it coming, but I didn't, not at all. It was supposed to be a simple dinner with Rita, this girl I'd met through some mutual friends. But what I didn't know was that when you agree to a date with her, you're not just going out with her, you're going out with her and her friend. Here's how it all started. I'd been talking to Rita for a few weeks. Nothing major, just casual texts, the usual small talk. She seemed cool, funny, easy to talk to. She suggested we meet at a new restaurant downtown that had gotten some good reviews. I was down. A simple, no-pressure dinner, right? So I show up at the restaurant, a little nervous because, it's a first date, but nothing too crazy. I get there early, find a table, and wait. I'm sitting there checking my phone, and then I see her walk in. Rita's looking great, I'm not gonna lie. But what I wasn't expecting was a girl walking in right behind her. She wasn't just tagging along, she was practically glued to Rita's side, looking around like she was ready to make a scene. Is this your friend? I thought, but Rita waved her over to the table before I could even ask. At first, I thought maybe it was just a one-time thing. Like, maybe the friend was just gonna grab a quick drink or something, and then she'd leave us to our date. But no, the friend pulls up a chair and sits down, smiling at me like she's been invited to the party too. Rita doesn't even bat an eye. For a second, I considered just walking out. I mean, what kind of date is this? But I didn't want to be rude, so I smiled, greeted them both, and sat down. I figured it wouldn't be so bad. I mean, the friend was friendly enough, right? What followed wasn't a date. It was a freaking interview. I thought the whole thing was weird from the start, but I didn't really know what was happening until we ordered our drinks. The friend, who introduced herself as Melanie, started asking me questions. At first, they were just casual. So, what do you do? Where are you from? What kind of music do you like? But it quickly spiraled into this weird personal interrogation. It wasn't even about getting to know me anymore. It was more like she was pulling apart my life, asking questions about my childhood, my family, what my parents did for a living, where I saw myself in 5 years. It was like she was taking notes in her head, trying to figure out if I was a right fit for Rita or something. I kept looking at Rita, but she just smiled at me like she didn't even notice. She didn't step in or try to change the subject or anything. In fact, she didn't say much at all. She just kept sipping her drink, looking at me with that I'm interested expression, while Melanie fired off question after question. It felt like I was auditioning for some kind of reality show, and Melanie was the producer. The weirdest part, it wasn't even like normal, polite conversation. It was like Melanie was testing me. She was throwing in low comments, like she was trying to catch me in some kind of trap. So, you say you like to travel. What's the most dangerous place you've ever been? Or, you said you're into sports. Do you ever get competitive? It was like she was trying to figure out what made me tick, but in a way that felt more like a game than a normal conversation. I didn't know how to handle it. Every time I gave an answer, she'd follow up with another question, always digging deeper, always poking in something I didn't want to talk about. I tried to steer the conversation toward more normal things, stuff I felt comfortable talking about, but it didn't work. Melanie would just loop it back to something else. And through all of it, Rita just sat there watching. At one point, I tried to make a joke to lighten the mood, but it didn't land. Melanie didn't even crack a smile. Instead, she stared at me like she was trying to figure out if I was being real or just saying what I thought people wanted to hear. Meanwhile, Rita, who had barely said a word, just gave a little chuckle, like she was amused by the whole thing. But it didn't feel like she was enjoying it. It felt like she was just watching this strange, uncomfortable show play out. The more it went on, the more I felt like I was in a dream. Was this really happening? I kept asking myself. Was this some kind of weird test? Or maybe Rita had set this whole thing up just to see how I'd react. Was I supposed to pass the Melanie test to move forward in the relationship? The whole thing started feeling like a nightmare, like I was stuck in an endless loop of questions with no escape. I kept telling myself it would end soon. Maybe Melanie would leave. Maybe Rita would finally step in and say something, but it never happened. The questions kept coming. There was no escape. Even when the waiter brought our food, it didn't stop. Melanie kept on with her questions about my past relationships, my childhood friends, even how I felt about marriage. It wasn't until dessert that things really hit the tipping point. Melanie asked me how I thought I was doing in the interview. She actually said that like it was some kind of job application. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to respond without looking like I was freaking out. I glanced at Rita again, but she was still just watching me, not offering a word of support. Eventually, I couldn't take any more. I politely excused myself, grabbed my jacket, and walked out of the restaurant. I didn't look back, didn't say goodbye, I didn't even check my phone for any messages. It was one of the most bizarre nights I've ever had. I ended up walking home, feeling like I had just escaped some weird psychological experiment. I never talked to Rita again after that night. I don't even know if she was aware of how uncomfortable it all was. But as for Melanie, I'm sure she's out there doing more interviews trying to figure out who's worthy of who. As for me, I still can't believe that happened. Every time I think back on that night, I can't help but wonder if Rita was just as clueless as I was or if she was in on the whole thing. Either way, that was my first and last date with her. I never thought I'd look back at my first date and think, well, that was the start of something unforgettable. Honestly, I thought it would be one of those awkward dinner and movie nights that end with a polite hug at the door. Instead, it turned into something I would never, ever forget, and something that's still part of our story today. It all started with Harry, this guy I met through a mutual friend. We texted a little bit, but it was the first time we were actually going to meet in person. He suggested we go for a drive. Now, I'm not sure why I thought that was a good idea, but it sounded low-key and fun enough. It wasn't until later that I realized how stupidly reckless that decision was, given what happened. We met at this small cafe downtown, grabbed coffee, and immediately hit it off. Harry was funny, easy to talk to, and just generally the kind of guy you could relax around. He wasn't overly pushy or awkward, just seemed like a normal guy. We spent a while chatting, and after a couple of hours, he suggested we go for that drive he had mentioned earlier. It seemed harmless enough. After all, it was a nice evening, and I figured we'd just cruise around, talk more, maybe get to know each other better. The car ride started out great. The windows were down, the weather was perfect, and the streets were pretty quiet. It wasn't too far from the city, so it wasn't like we were in the middle of nowhere or anything. But we ended up on some winding back roads, heading toward the outskirts of town. At first, I didn't really think much of it. We were just talking and enjoying the drive when suddenly, Harry started getting more excited about the speed of the car. He had one of those old school muscle cars, and you could tell it meant a lot to him. At first, it was all fine. He wasn't speeding or acting reckless, just enjoying the car. But then it started to get weirder. The road we were on had these sharp curves, and Harry started taking them faster and faster. I could feel the tension building, but I didn't want to seem paranoid or ruin the fun. So I kept quiet, telling myself he probably knew what he was doing. Then it happened. I don't know if it was the curve in the road or just a momentary lapse in judgment, but suddenly the car swerved off the road. There was this horrible screeching sound as the tires lost grip, and before I could even react, we slammed into a tree. I don't really remember everything about that split second, but I do remember the deafening crash and the way the airbag exploded in front of me. Everything seemed to freeze. My heart was pounding, and I was sitting there stunned, trying to figure out if I was okay. When I looked over at Harry, the reality of the situation hit me like a punch to the stomach. He was slumped over, unconscious, and blood was dripping down his forehead. The car was completely wrecked, the front end smashed in, and there was this awful smell of burning rubber and gasoline. I don't know how long I sat there, completely frozen in panic. But then, adrenaline kicked in. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. The dispatcher's voice was a faint buzz in the background as I screamed into the phone, telling them we crashed and needed help. I couldn't think straight, but I knew I had to get Harry out of the car somehow. The doors were jammed, but somehow I managed to yank mine open. I climbed out and ran around to Harry's side. His head was lolling to one side, and I could barely breathe just looking at him. I won't lie, there was a moment when I thought he might not make it. The road was empty. There were no cars, no houses nearby. It was just me and him, and everything felt so wrong. But somehow I got him out of the car, dragging him to the side of the road as best I could. It felt like an eternity waiting for the ambulance to show up. When the paramedics finally arrived, I was so relieved that I could have cried, but I didn't. I just focused on making sure Harry was okay. They rushed him to the hospital, and I followed in my car, barely able to keep my hands on the wheel because they were shaking so much. At the hospital, things got even worse. They told me he had a concussion, a broken leg, and some pretty serious cuts. I felt sick to my stomach, not knowing how to process everything. The doctors were telling me it could be a while before he woke up, and honestly, I wasn't sure I could handle waiting alone in that sterile hospital room. I stayed with him, though. I don't know why. I guess I felt like I had to. Something inside me told me to stay and be there for him. I spent hours sitting next to him, holding his hand, wishing I could undo everything that happened. I didn't want this to be the end of our night, or worse, the end of something more. I didn't even know what we were, but I knew I didn't want this to be the last memory I had of him. Over the next few days, things started to get better in a way. Harry woke up groggy and confused, but he was alive, and that was enough for me. He was in a hospital for a while, recovering from the worst of his injuries, but even after everything that happened, I couldn't just leave him. I felt responsible, like it was my fault that he ended up in that situation. I know it wasn't, but that didn't stop the guilt from eating at me. After he got out of the hospital, I offered to help him out while he recovered. I started visiting him every day, bringing him food, helping him with simple things. As he healed, we talked more about the crash, about what happened, about our lives. I think that's when we really got to know each other. It wasn't some whirlwind romance or some grand gesture. It was just two people who had gone through something traumatic together and came out on the other side with a strange bond. Fast forward 20 years and we're married. I look back at that night sometimes, and I still can't fully explain how it all turned out the way it did. I never expected that the night I thought would be just another first date would turn into something so much more. But here we are, 20 years later, still together, still remembering that wild, terrifying first date every time we laugh about it. Sometimes I think about how different things could have gone. I could have left him there, gone home, and never seen him again. But for some reason I didn't. I stayed, and I'm glad I did. And now, every time we look at each other, it's not just a love story. It's a story of survival, of being there for each other no matter what. I still can't get the image of that bathroom out of my head. It's like it's burned into my brain, and every time I close my eyes, all I can see is the reflection in the mirror. That moment, it still haunts me. But I guess it started out like any other normal night. Freya and I had been talking for a while, and after a few weeks of texting and getting to know each other, I thought it was finally time to take her out. She suggested we go to this party at her friend's place, a mutual friend of ours, and I thought it sounded pretty chill. I mean, what could go wrong at a house party, right? I'd met her friends before at a couple of get-togethers, and everyone seemed pretty cool. I showed up at the party a little nervous, but excited to see Freya. I've been really into her for a while now. She was that kind of girl that had this laid-back vibe, but was also just different. She didn't try to stand out, but she did anyway, if that makes sense. I felt like we clicked, at least I thought we did. When I found her at the party, she was standing by the drinks, talking to a few people. She smiled when she saw me, and honestly, my heart skipped a beat. We talked a lot, but seeing her in person always hit different. I made my way over to her, we exchanged some casual small talk, and then we decided to hang out together. The night started off pretty smooth. We grabbed some drinks and just mingled with people, laughing, chatting, and having a good time. I didn't think anything of it when she started talking to some of her friends and I got caught up with some people I knew. The house was packed. Everyone was drinking. The music was loud and the energy was high. At first, I didn't really mind the fact that Freya was hanging out with other people. We were at a party after all. But as the night wore on, I started noticing something. She seemed a little more distant than usual, like she wasn't really paying attention when I talked, or when I made a joke, she'd just laugh and move on to someone else. I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing. She was probably just having fun with her friends. But then came the moment that made everything unravel. It was around midnight. The party was still going strong. I was starting to feel a bit more out of place. I was standing with a couple of friends in the kitchen, talking about whatever, when I saw Freya walk down the hallway toward the bathroom. I didn't think much of it. She'd been going to the bathroom on and off all night, just like everyone else. But something in me told me to follow. Maybe it was just a gut feeling, or maybe I was overthinking it, but I followed her. I didn't even mean to eavesdrop. But when I got close to the bathroom door, I noticed it was slightly cracked open. The music from the party was still loud, so it felt like a weird, quiet bubble right there in the hallway. I wasn't even trying to peek or anything, but something inside made me lean a little closer, and that's when I saw it. Freya with some guy. His hands were on her, and she was kissing him back like it was the most natural thing in the world. My chest tightened in that moment. I froze, not knowing what to do. It wasn't just the fact that she was kissing someone else. No, it was the fact that I'd seen her do it with him. It wasn't just a random guy from the party. It was Brad, a guy I knew, a guy who had flirted with her a few times before, and one of the guys who'd always had a thing for her. It wasn't just a momentary slip, either. They were wrapped up in each other, completely oblivious to everything else going on around them. I couldn't even process what was happening. I stood there in the hallway, feeling like a complete idiot. Here I was, thinking we were having a nice night, and she was in the bathroom, making out with some dude. The worst part was I didn't know how to feel. Was I angry? Hurt? Or was I just embarrassed? I think it was all of it at once. I wanted to leave, I really did. I wanted to just walk out of that house and never look back. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, watching them for what felt like forever. I don't even know what I thought was going to happen. That they'd stop? That she'd look up and see me standing there, with a look on my face and realize what was going on? No, none of that happened. I just stood there, feeling like I was stuck in some kind of sick nightmare. I didn't want to confront her then and there, not in that moment, not with Brad still with her. But as soon as I turned around to leave, I bumped into one of her other friends, and they looked at me with this knowing expression on their face. I could tell they'd seen what happened too, and I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. I didn't even make it through the rest of the night. I grabbed my jacket, muttered something about needing to go, and headed straight for the door. My heart was pounding, my thoughts all over the place. I didn't even text her. I just left. When I got to my car, I sat there for a while, trying to wrap my head around it. Should I have confronted her right then? Was I overreacting? But deep down, I knew I wasn't. The way she had acted all night, the way she was distant and distracted, it all made sense now. I don't think I'll ever forget that image, though. The way she kissed Brad, the way everything felt so off. I haven't talked to her since. She sent me a message later that night, but I didn't even open it. I guess some things are better left unanswered. I don't know what I was thinking agreeing to go on a date with a guy I barely knew. His name was Michael, and we had met a few weeks back at a party. He seemed normal at the time. Nothing special, just a regular guy with a decent smile and some half-decent conversation. He asked me out, and I thought, why not? What's the worst that could happen? Looking back, I should have listened to the little voice in my head that told me to cancel. But instead, I got dressed, put on my favorite jeans, and hoped for the best. Honestly, I didn't expect much from a first date, but I wasn't prepared for what actually happened. When I got to the restaurant, I was already a little nervous. It was one of those trendy places downtown. All dim lights, weird abstract art on the walls, and a menu full of things I couldn't pronounce. I stood by the door for a minute, scanning the room, trying to spot Michael. I saw a guy who sort of looked like him, sitting at a booth in the back with a group of guys. I made my way over, and as soon as he saw me, he stood up and waved. "Hey, you made it." "Glad you could come," he said, a little too loudly, already getting up to give me a hug. I noticed right away that his friends were looking at me. Not in a friendly way, but more like I was a side dish at their already chaotic dinner. They were laughing, talking, and making jokes, but not the kind of jokes you laugh along with. It was more like they were laughing at me, and I wasn't sure why. Michael introduced me to the group, his boys as he called them. There was Tim, who had a laugh that sounded like a hyena, and Luke, who was already halfway through a drink and slurring his words. The others were a blur. All I remember is that none of them seemed like people I wanted to be around, let alone on a date. But Michael didn't seem to care. In fact, he was acting like everything was perfectly normal. I sat down at the table, trying to smile, trying to keep it together, but it was hard. It felt like the walls were closing in. These guys were loud, like really loud. Every time they spoke, it felt like the whole restaurant could hear them. They'd talk over each other, shout random things, laugh too loudly at things that weren't even funny, and make offhand comments about random people who walked by. I wasn't sure if they were trying to impress me, or if they were just this obnoxious all the time. Michael didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. He kept looking at me every few seconds, like he expected me to laugh or join in on the madness. I wanted to, I really did, but I couldn't bring myself to. I didn't even know who these people were, and they definitely weren't making me feel comfortable. As the night dragged on, it got worse. Every time the waiter came over, one of them would yell something stupid, like asking if they had a burger that could kill you, or making jokes about the menu being too fancy. It was as if they were trying to draw attention, and the louder they got, the more awkward I felt. Michael would laugh, give them a slap on the back, and then turn to me like it was all part of the plan. But I wasn't in on the joke. I kept looking at my phone, hoping it was close to the time I could leave. But Michael kept ordering more drinks, and so did his friends. The entire situation was becoming unbearable, and I could feel the anxiety building in my chest. I didn't know how much longer I could sit there without wanting to scream. One of the guys, Tim, I think, started talking about something that made my stomach turn. It was about some crazy night out they had a few weeks ago. Apparently, they had gone to some dive bar and gotten into a huge argument with a group of guys. But it wasn't just an argument. Tim was going on about how he and Michael had handled it, and that it was one of the best fights they'd ever been in. He kept making it sound like something to be proud of, like they were tough guys or something. The way they were talking like violence was a casual thing made my blood run cold. I tried to zone out, thinking about anything else, but every time I looked up, one of them was staring at me. I wasn't sure if it was because they wanted me to join in, or if they were just too drunk to care. But it felt off, really off. I started to feel a little trapped. And then came the moment when it all snapped. Michael started getting a little too handsy. It wasn't aggressive, but there was something in the way he touched my arm or leaned in too close that didn't sit right. At first, I tried to ignore it. I figured it was just nerves, or maybe I was being paranoid. But when he made a comment about how we should hang out more, while his hand brushed against my leg, I had had enough. I tried to stand up and excuse myself, but before I could, Luke, the one who'd been drinking the most, stood up and blocked my way. "Where you going, babe?" He slurred, grinning at me in a way that made my skin crawl. I smiled awkwardly, trying to get around him, but he just laughed and stepped closer. "No need to run off," he said, clearly not understanding the situation. My heart started pounding. I knew I had to get out of there, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Michael was still sitting there, laughing along with his friends, acting like everything was fine, but nothing was fine. I pushed past Luke, my heart racing as I made my way to the door. I didn't care about the bill or the awkward stares from Michael and his friends. I just needed to leave. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael, but I didn't care enough to read it. I don't know what went wrong, but I knew one thing for sure: I would never go out with him again.